God speaks to His chosen ones through their addictions. If this is your first time here, subscribe to stay connected to this part of yourself that the world doesn't see. If the video resonates with you, like, share, comment, to help others discover this path. Welcome to this space of clarity. So we create substitutes. We drink wine not for its taste, but for the warmth it brings to a cold heart. We seek sensations not for the joy itself, but for the fleeting moment when we forget ourselves. Before you take me literally, I'm not claiming that every desire is sacred in itself. But every desire, every nagging yearning of the soul, is a distorted echo of something sacred. For the truth is that every human being is haunted by a profound sense of incompleteness. We are born into this world as fragments, and we spend our lives trying to remember what we once were. Whole, complete, united with the whole. Why this emptiness? Why this hunger that never truly goes away? What if what you call addiction wasn't a weakness, but a misunderstood message? The illusion of lack. There is something deeply disturbing about the way human beings organize their entire lives around an absence they don't even know how to name. They move forward, they accumulate, they hope, convinced that one specific day, after one more action, one more experience, one more victory, something will finally stabilize within them. And yet, even when the object is attained, even when the sensation is there, a slight dissonance remains, as if it's never quite right. So they start again. Not out of genuine pleasure, but out of fidelity to a vague intuition. There must be something. A bottle becomes a promise. A love becomes a lifeline. A habit becomes a reassuring ritual. Not because it fulfills, but because it distracts from that subtle unease that whispers in the background. But observe this unease carefully. Is it truly proof of an emptiness, or simply the sound of an ancient memory trying to resurface? For we can only regret what we have known. We can only desire a state if, in one way or another, we have already experienced it. What if this feeling of incompleteness were not a flaw to be repaired, but a misinterpreted reminder? It is precisely from this observation that desire begins to take on a strange, almost sacred form, as if it were trying to say something without yet finding the words. By approaching addiction from a moral perspective, we forget to listen to what it truly expresses. We judge it, we fight it, we hide it as if it were an anomaly to be corrected. Yet, if we suspend our judgment for a moment, something strangely coherent appears. This repeated movement towards a sensation is not simply an escape. It is an attempt at contact. Clumsy, confused, sometimes destructive, but sincere in its impulse. For what you are seeking is not pleasure in itself. Pleasure is only a side effect. What you are seeking is that precise moment when the center relaxes, when the effort to maintain oneself as a self disappears. The instant when the inner commentary falls silent. Where you no longer bear your name, your history, your role. Where you are simply there without limits. Why this sudden relief when the boundaries fall? Why this feeling of profound rest when, for a second, you completely forget yourself? It is not the object that soothes, but the temporary erasure of the one who was searching. And this effacement strangely resembles what traditions once called prayer. Not a request addressed to the outside world, but a movement of return to inner silence. The problem may not be the desire itself, but the direction it takes, for by seeking outside oneself what dissolves the ego, something essential already begins to be distorted, confusing the moon and its reflection. From the moment desire fixes on a specific object, a subtle confusion sets in. The mind begins to believe that the experience itself holds the power it momentarily feels. The substance becomes sacred. The ritual becomes indispensable. The person becomes irreplaceable. And without even realizing it, we transfer to the form what belonged to the inner state. The door is no longer a passage, it becomes an object to be possessed. Then the gesture is repeated with increased intensity. The conditions are refined. The setting is perfected. We tell ourselves that this time, if everything is perfect, the feeling will last. But a silent law is at work. What is grasped freezes, and what freezes loses its life. The more we cling to the experience, the more it is emptied of what makes it. This is where the ancient image takes on its full meaning. The moon was never in the water. What you touched was only a reflection, an ephemeral trace of something infinitely vaster. And every attempt to grasp it only disturbs the surface, making the reflection even more elusive. Have you noticed that precise moment when satisfaction transforms into disappointment? That instant when attainment coincides with loss? This paradox is not a punishment, but a subtle clue indicating that the direction itself deserves to be questioned, because by pursuing reflections, the mind is already moving away from what can never disappear. As the quest intensifies, a deeper feeling begins to reveal itself, that of being cut off from something essential. Not simply deprived of pleasure or meaning, but detached from life itself, as if existence were unfolding elsewhere, behind an invisible pane of glass. This feeling of separation is not always conscious, but it colors every gesture, every choice, every addiction. We are no longer simply seeking to feel, we are seeking to reconnect. Then addiction becomes a makeshift bridge, a temporary way to feel connected again, even if that connection lasts only a few moments. In these fleeting moments, the boundary between self and world seems to soften. The body relaxes, the heart opens, and for a second the fundamental solitude seems to dissolve. But as soon as the effect fades, the separation returns, sometimes even more pronounced than before. The essential question, therefore, is not how to bridge this distance, but where the idea that it exists comes from. For this separation is never observed directly, it is always narrated. It rests on an inner narrative that asserts, me here, the world out there. A story repeated so often that it ends up seeming obvious, almost natural. What if this persistent pain doesn't stem from a real separation, but from having believed, without ever questioning it, in this story of the isolated self? Because from this belief, all searching inevitably becomes an attempt to return to a place we have, in truth, never left. The game has turned into a tragedy. Originally, desire is light. It arises as a living impulse, a natural surge of consciousness exploring its own possibilities. It demands nothing, it offers. It invites us to taste, to feel, to participate in the movement. But somewhere along the way something tenses up. The pleasant experience ceases to be a passage and becomes a goal. What was once just a game transforms into a stake. Then the mind begins to negotiate with life. It wants to relive exactly the same emotion in the same place under the same conditions. It clings to the memory of ecstasy rather than to the present moment. And the more it tries to repeat, the further it moves away from the original freshness. For what was once experienced as a spontaneous dance is now approached as a possession to be secured. This is where the tragedy is born. Not because pleasure disappears, but because we ask of it what it cannot offer: permanence. Life has never promised faithful repetition. It unfolds as a rhythm, never as a fixed form. Each moment is unique, irreplaceable, already transforming at the very moment we try to cling to it. Why then this desire to imprison what can only escape? Perhaps because, deep down, the mind confuses stability with security, and still refuses to trust the movement itself, without seeing that it is precisely this refusal that generates the subsequent tension, the one that pushes us to seek a new escape. The silence you are running from. When the agitation subsides, something inevitable appears. Not a dramatic void, but a bare space, without stimulation, without imposed direction. It is often at this precise moment that unease arises. Not because pleasure has disappeared, but because there is nothing left to mask what remains. Silence never arrives like a noisy enemy, it settles in gently, almost timidly, and it is precisely this gentleness that makes it so difficult to bear. In the silence, there is nothing to do, nothing to pursue, nothing to improve. It offers no promise of the future. It offers no role to play. And for a mind accustomed to defining itself through action, this emptiness is perceived as a threat. So we immediately fill it. With a sound. With a thought. With a familiar gesture. Not because the silence hurts, but because it confirms nothing of what we believe ourselves to be. Yet this silence is not empty. It is simply devoid of distractions. And in this absence of noise, something begins to make itself heard. Not an accusing voice, nor a moral judgment, but a discreet, almost fragile whisper. A sensation of formless presence, difficult to name, impossible to control. What we are fleeing, then, is not silence itself, but the possibility of encountering ourselves without intermediaries. And as long as this encounter is avoided, the movement of desire will continue to seek outside what patiently awaits recognition within. Misdirected desire. It is easy to believe that the problem lies in desire itself, as if it were a force to be controlled or eliminated. Yet, without desire, nothing would move. It is the fundamental impulse that drives life to manifest itself, to express itself, to unfold in 1,000 forms. It is neither pure nor impure. It is simply in motion. It is the directions we impose on it that determine whether it nourishes or exhausts. When desire is still connected to its source, it flows freely. It inspires, it permeates, then it dissolves. But when it is captured by a specific image, an object, a sensation, a promise, it loses its fluidity. It no longer knows where to go. It goes around in circles. What was a living impulse becomes a mechanical compulsion. The hunger persists even after eating. Then the same gesture is repeated again and again, not out of passion but out of inertia. There is no longer any discovery, only the confused hope that this time, something will be different. Yet, what is sought has never resided in the object. The object was merely a trigger, a pretext allowing desire to momentarily relax. When this confusion begins to dissipate, a silent recognition emerges. It wasn't the thing itself that brought comfort, but the inner state it seemed to unlock. And as long as this state is attributed to external factors, the desire will continue to project itself, paving the way for an even more subtle search for what it has never ceased to be. The addict and the monk. At first glance, everything seems to oppose these two figures. One is perceived as lost, the other as disciplined. One flees, the other seeks. And yet, if we look beyond appearances, the same silent aspiration runs through both of them. Both seek to escape the weight of the self, that constant feeling of being imprisoned in a narrow and separate identity, always in tension. It is not destruction that is sought, but relief. The addict doesn't really seek the substance. He seeks the moment when the inner voice falls silent, when the boundaries blur, when the world ceases to be perceived through the filter of control. The monk, on the other hand, learns to achieve this same liberation without external support. He trains himself to detach from attachments, images, and narratives. The method changes, but the profound impulse remains the same. Where one depends on the ephemeral to touch the infinite, the other discovers the infinite in the simple act of clinging to nothing. One forces the door open, the other waits for it to open. But in both cases, it is a movement towards the disappearance of the one who believes himself to be separate. Seeing this kinship doesn't excuse anything, but it illuminates. It suggests that addiction is not a call to be crushed, but to be reoriented, because when such a powerful impulse is misunderstood, it doesn't disappear. It persists until its true meaning begins to reveal itself. There comes a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming, when something becomes clear effortlessly. Nothing has been forced, nothing has been suppressed, and yet the tension that fueled the cycle begins to release. This is not a victory of control over impulse, but the end of a misunderstanding. Like finally understanding the meaning of a sentence repeated for too long without being heard. At this moment, desire is no longer perceived as an enemy to be controlled or as a temptation to be satisfied. It becomes a signal, information, a precise indication of what is seeking recognition. By ceasing to struggle, the energy that was previously scattered naturally gathers itself. There is no longer any urgency. No more panic at the thought of missing out on something. What fueled the repetition, the confusion, the expectation, the misplaced hope, begins to dissolve. Listening does not mean obeying. Listening means allowing the movement to reveal itself without immediately giving it a form. And in this open attention, desire loses its compulsive nature. It no longer needs to shout to be heard. It transforms, sometimes even into a simple sensation of presence, calm and stable. This liberation is nothing spectacular. It's more of an inner sigh, a profound relaxation that had never been allowed before. And from this space, another way of being free becomes imaginable, not as an escape or a break, but as a new intimacy with what was previously avoided. The freedom in question here is nothing spectacular. It resembles neither a resounding victory over oneself nor a heroic asceticism. It appears rather as a subtle relief, almost disappointing to the ego because it offers no trophy to brandish. It consists neither of crushing desire nor of blindly surrendering to it, but of clearly seeing what it had been indicating from the beginning. When understanding sets in, something changes profoundly. Desire may still arise, but it no longer carries that feverish urgency, that feeling that one absolutely must act to be complete. It is perceived as an ephemeral movement, a wave among others, and not as a truth to be followed or fought against. This simple perspective transforms the entire relationship to experience. At that moment, the quest loses its main driving force. Not because the world becomes bland or uninteresting, but because the underlying feeling of lack ceases to organize every action. What one sought through forms, sensations, and altered states is revealed to have always been there, silent, available, never threatened by absence or loss. There are no fireworks, only a quiet recognition. A slight inner smile, almost ironic, at the effort expended to reach a place that had never ceased to be present. What seemed to be a prison is then revealed to be a passage, and this passage does not lead elsewhere, but to a profound familiarity with what, from the beginning, was only waiting to be recognized. If this moment has touched you, I invite you to stay close. Subscribe, like, and share if you feel inspired. Not to support a channel, but to continue this journey we are exploring together. Each video is a space where we can breathe a little more freely. Stay with me until the end. You might find a fragment of peace there, or a little light that your spirit longs for.